The rain is lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, blurring the twinkling skyline of the city into a wash of muted gold and gray. I take a slow sip of my Earl Grey tea, letting the bergamot warm my throat. On the marble countertop next to me, my phone lights up, vibrating with a frantic, desperate rhythm. Marcus, 52 missed calls. I watch the screen glow, flash, and finally fade to black. A small, cold smile touches my lips. I reach out, my hand perfectly steady, and press the block button. Just like that, the silence returns. It's a beautiful, expensive silence. The kind of peace you can only buy when you've stripped the toxicity out of your life by the root. If you had told me 6 months ago that I would be sitting in a luxury high-rise, intentionally ignoring the panicked calls of my only son, I would have told you that you were out of your mind. I was a mother, a widow, a retired high school English teacher who lived a quiet, predictable life in a sprawling, cedar-shingled house in upstate New York. I thought I knew exactly how my story would end, surrounded by the apple orchards my late husband Thomas and I had planted 40 years ago, fading quietly into the background of my family's lives. But families are funny things. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to spill it. To understand how we got to this penthouse, and to this blocked number, we have to go back to the beginning of the end. Back to the day the vultures started circling. It started subtly. It always does, doesn't it? Betrayal rarely announces itself with a megaphone. It creeps in on tiptoes, wearing a cashmere sweater and carrying a Tupperware container of organic chicken soup. That was Chloe, my daughter-in-law. For the first 7 years of her marriage to Marcus, Chloe treated me with the kind of polite, distant tolerance you usually reserve for a neighbor's annoying dog. We saw each other on Thanksgiving, a brief afternoon on Christmas Eve, and maybe one obligatory summer barbecue where she would complain about the mosquitoes in the orchard. She was an event planner, always polished, always impeccably dressed in neutral tones, and always subtly checking her watch when she was in my house. Then, about 4 months ago, the weather shifted. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in late October. I was on the back porch, pruning a notoriously stubborn rosebush, when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I looked up to see Marcus's sleek black Audi pulling in. That was the first red flag. Marcus never visited on a weekday. He was a regional manager for a logistics firm, a man who worshipped his calendar and viewed a spontaneous Tuesday visit as a mortal sin against productivity. But it wasn't just Marcus. Chloe stepped out of the passenger side, holding a wicker basket. She was wearing a soft beige cardigan, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose, casual clip that probably took her an hour to perfect in the mirror. "Eleanor," she called out, her voice dripping with a sugary sweetness that made my teeth ache. "We just wanted to surprise you." I wiped my hands on my gardening apron, my brow furrowing. "Marcus, is everything all right? Why aren't you at the office?" Marcus looked exhausted. His shoulders, usually pulled back with practiced confidence, were slumped. There were deep purple shadows under his eyes, and his suit looked like he'd slept in it. He offered a tight, unconvincing smile. "Just had some meetings nearby, Mom. Figured we'd drop in and check on you." "Check on me?" I echoed, amused. "I'm pruning roses, Marcus, not climbing Mount Everest." Chloe swept up the porch steps, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive lavender perfume. "We worry, Eleanor. You're out here all alone in this massive house. It's so isolated." She set the basket on the patio table. "I made you some roasted butternut squash soup, packed with vitamins. You need to keep your strength up." I thanked her, though my stomach gave a strange, uneasy flutter. Chloe had never cooked for me in her life. She usually brought store-bought wine and complained about her gluten intolerance. That Tuesday was the beginning of the invasion. Suddenly they were everywhere. Every weekend, Marcus and Chloe were driving up from the city. At first, it looked like devotion. To the outside world, to my neighbors, they were the picture-perfect, doting children. But inside the house, the atmosphere began to suffocate me. The campaign to break my confidence started with my memory. "Eleanor, did you leave the back door unlocked again?" Chloe would ask, walking into the kitchen with a deeply concerned frown. "You know how dangerous that is?" "I locked it after I brought the firewood in," I'd reply, stirring my tea. "Well, it was wide open," she would sigh, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. We all get a little forgetful at this age. Marcus and I just want you to be safe." The gaslighting was masterful. Items began moving around the house. My reading glasses would vanish from the nightstand and reappear in the downstairs bathroom. The television remote would end up in the refrigerator. Important mail, utility bills, property tax notices would go missing from the entryway table, only for Chloe to find them tucked inside a magazine 3 days later. "You really need to let us handle this paperwork, Mom," Marcus said one Sunday afternoon, holding up a slightly overdue electric bill. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept staring at this kitchen island, his jaw tight. "It's too much for you to keep track of. You're stressed." "I am not stressed, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am perfectly capable of paying a $60 utility bill. I've been managing this household since your father passed 10 years ago." "But things change, Eleanor," Chloe chimed in, gliding into the kitchen. She picked up a stray piece of lint from the counter, a subtle critique of my housekeeping. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden. You should be relaxing. Have you looked at those brochures I left on your dresser?" The brochures. Glossy, thick-stock pamphlets for Sunset Pines and the Whispering Willows. High-end assisted living facilities. The kind of places that promised vibrant senior communities, but really just meant waiting rooms for the grave. "I threw them in the recycling bin," I said flatly. "I am 65, Chloe, not 85. I am in perfect health. I do Pilates 3 times a week, and I manage a 4-acre property. I am not moving into a facility." Chloe's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went hard and glassy like polished stones. "We just want what's best for you. This house, it's too much for one person. The stairs, the maintenance, it's a liability." Liability. Such a cold, corporate word to describe the home where my husband and I had built our lives, where Marcus had taken his first steps. I started paying closer attention after that. When you realize the people around you are writing a narrative where you are the helpless, confused victim, you stop arguing with them and start watching them. I noticed the way Marcus was losing weight. I noticed how his phone was constantly ringing and how he would step out into the freezing November air to take the calls, his voice sharp and panicked, pacing the length of the driveway. I noticed the way Chloe would casually wander through the house, her eyes darting to the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, the original oil paintings Thomas had collected, the solid oak dining table. She wasn't looking at them with nostalgia. She was appraising them. She was looking at my life and calculating the retail value. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that shattered my heart and forced me to wake up, happened on a Thursday morning in late November. I was in the kitchen, baking a pie for a church bake sale, when a white van pulled into the driveway. A man in a blue polo shirt holding a clipboard stepped out. Chloe had arrived an hour earlier, claiming she wanted to help me clean out the attic. When the doorbell rang, Chloe practically sprinted to the door. "I'll get it. It's just the cable guy, Eleanor. I ordered an upgrade for your internet so we can video call you more easily." "I don't need upgraded internet, Chloe," I called out from the kitchen, wiping flour from my hands. But she was already outside, the front door closed firmly behind her. Curiosity, and a deeply ingrained maternal instinct that told me something was terribly wrong, drew me out of the kitchen. I walked quietly to the living room window, staying hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains, and peeked out. Chloe was standing on the lawn with the cable guy, but he wasn't looking at the utility poles. He was looking at the roof line. He was holding a laser measuring tape, pointing it at the foundation of the house. He walked around to the side of the porch, writing furiously on his clipboard, while Chloe hovered next to him, pointing at the property line that bordered the woods. Cable guys do not measure foundations. Appraisers do. My breath caught in my throat. The cold reality washed over me, chilling me to the bone. They weren't here to upgrade my internet. They weren't here because they loved me, or because they were worried about my memory, or because they wanted me to eat butternut squash soup. They were preparing to sell my house. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. A sudden wave of nausea hit me. My own son, my own flesh and blood was orchestrating a plan to rip the roof from over my head, all while smiling in my face and telling me I was losing my mind. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went. When Chloe came back inside, humming a cheerful, tuneless melody, she announced she was going upstairs to start on the attic. I waited until I heard her footsteps creak against the floorboards directly above my head. Then I walked silently into the guest bedroom, where Marcus and Chloe stayed during their weekend visits. Marcus had left his leather briefcase resting on the armchair. He had driven into town to pick up some hardware supplies, leaving it unattended. A fatal mistake. My hands shook slightly as I unbuckled the leather straps. I felt a fleeting pang of guilt, a mother violating her son's privacy, but it was instantly swallowed by the instinct to survive. I pulled out a stack of manila folders. Most of them were boring logistical reports, spreadsheets full of shipping numbers. But at the very bottom, there was a red folder. It was thick. I opened it, and the world seemed to stop spinning. The first document was a letter from the Internal Revenue Service. It was a final notice of intent to levy. Marcus owed back taxes, a lot of them, but that wasn't the worst of it. Behind the IRS letter were statements from a private lending company, the kind with exorbitant interest rates, the kind that operated just on the edge of the law. Marcus was drowning. He was in debt for nearly $400,000. His business logistics firm wasn't thriving. It was a shell game, and the shell had finally cracked open. My eyes stung with tears. Why hadn't he come to me? Why hadn't he just asked for help? I would have mortgaged the house myself, sold my jewelry, done whatever it took to save my child. But then I saw the second document in the folder, and the tears stopped, replaced by a cold, hard knot of absolute fury. It was a draft of a real estate listing. Charming, historic 4-acre estate in upstate New York. Prime development opportunity. Motivated sellers. Attached to the back of the listing was a copy of a document I hadn't seen in 5 years. It was a piece of paper I had signed in a hospital bed, hopped up on painkillers before a risky bypass surgery. A durable power of attorney. I had signed it, giving Marcus the legal authority to make medical and financial decisions for me if I didn't wake up from the surgery, or if I suffered a stroke. I had survived, fully recovered, and in the joy of getting my life back, I had completely forgotten to revoke the document. It was still active. Legally, on paper, Marcus had the power to empty my bank accounts, sign contracts in my name, and sell my home without my signature. And looking at the documents in my hand, it was clear that Chloe had found it, realized its power, and convinced a desperate, cowardly Marcus to use it. They weren't planning on asking me to move. They were planning on legally evicting me, throwing me into a facility, and liquidating my life to pay off his failures. "Eleanor?" Chloe's voice drifted down from the upstairs hallway. "Are you all right down there? Do you need me to come make you some tea?" I carefully placed the papers back exactly as I had found them. I closed the red folder, slipped it into the briefcase, and buckled the straps. I stood up, smoothing the front of my apron. I looked at my reflection in the guest room mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a frail, confused widow. She was a mother who had just realized she was at war. "I'm perfectly fine, Chloe." I called back up the stairs, my voice steady, clear, and bright. "Just getting the pie out of the oven. Take your time." I walked back to the kitchen. The smell of baked apples and cinnamon filled the air. I poured myself a glass of cold water and drank it down. They thought I was weak. They thought my love for my son would blind me to the knife his wife was pressing against my back. They thought a piece of paper from 5 years ago gave them the keys to my kingdom. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one who taught Marcus how to play chess, and I never, ever lose. If they wanted a legal battle for my legacy, they were going to get one. But I wouldn't fight them with shouting matches or tears. I would fight them with silence, strategy, and a financial trap so devastating they wouldn't know it hit them until the steel jaws snapped shut. It was time to make a phone call to Arthur. Arthur's law office always smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint, lingering ghost of cherry pipe tobacco. It was a space trapped in the late 90s, all dark mahogany and green leather, tucked away on the second floor of a brick building in the historic district of town. Arthur himself was a fixture of my past, a man who had stood beside my husband Thomas as his best man 40 years ago. If there was one person left in this world I could trust implicitly, it was him. I sat across from his massive desk, the red folder I had carefully copied at the local library resting between us. I had told him everything on the phone, but seeing the physical documents laid out in front of him cast a heavy, suffocating silence over the room. Arthur adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, reading the IRS notice first, then the predatory loan statements, and finally, the copy of the durable power of attorney. I watched his jaw tighten, the muscles working under his lined, weathered skin. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clouded with a mixture of profound sorrow and deep professional rage. "Eleanor," he started, his voice a low gravel, "I can have this power of attorney revoked by noon today. I can draft the revocation, We march it down to the county clerk, and we send a certified copy to Marcus and every financial institution you use. We freeze him out instantly. This is elder abuse. Plain and simple. I could have him arrested for even attempting to utilize this under false pretenses. I looked down at my hands. They were resting in my lap, perfectly still. I had done all my crying the night before, alone in my kitchen, mourning the boy I had raised. The boy who used to scrape his knees on the gravel driveway and run to me for bandages. That boy was dead. The man wearing his face was a stranger desperate enough to ruin me. "No, Arthur," I said quietly. Arthur blinked, leaning forward. "Eleanor, did you hear me? If you leave this active, Marcus has the legal right to sign the deed of your house over to a buyer. He can empty your checking account. He is a drowning man, and you are his life raft. He will pull you under." "I know," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But if we revoke it now, he and Chloe will just find another way. They will claim I'm medically unfit to revoke it. They will drag me into a brutal public conservatorship battle. Chloe will parade doctors into a courtroom to say my memory is failing. They will make it ugly, Arthur. They will drag Thomas's name and this family through the mud. So what do you want to do? Let them sell your home out from under you?" "No," I smiled, a tight, humorless expression. "I want to let them think they are selling my home. I want to let them use the power of attorney. I want them to feel absolutely unequivocally victorious." Arthur stared at me, his legal mind whirring, trying to catch up with a mother's calculated grief. "I'm listening." We spent 3 hours in that office. We didn't just build a defense, we built a trap. A financial labyrinth so complex and legally binding that by the time my son and his viper of a wife realized they were in it, the doors would already be locked from the outside. But to make it work, to give Arthur the time to put the pieces into play, I had to do the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I had to go home and play the victim. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in psychological endurance. Every weekend, Marcus and Chloe arrived, their smiles wider, their concern more cloying and suffocating than ever. I watched them measure my windows, mentally catalog my antiques, and pack away my life while pretending to organize my closets. "You really don't need all these heavy winter coats, Eleanor," Chloe said one Saturday, holding up the beautiful wool trench coat Thomas had bought me in London. "The climate control at in smaller apartments, it's so much better. I'll just box this up for goodwill, okay?" "Oh, if you think that's best, dear," I murmured, staring blankly at the television screen. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached for my tea. It was a subtle touch, but I saw Chloe's eyes dart to my shaking hands. A flicker of triumph crossed her face. The emotional toll of those weeks was staggering. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to slap the smug, condescending smile off Chloe's face, to grab Marcus by the lapels of his expensive suit and shake him until the truth fell out of his mouth. "How could you?" I wanted to ask him. "How could you look at the woman who gave you life, who wiped your tears and paid your college tuition, and see nothing but an ATM to cover your own pathetic mistakes?" But I swallowed the bile. I swallowed the heartbreak. I let them guide me by the elbow when walking down the steps. I intentionally forgot where I put the spare keys. I let them believe the narrative they had constructed, that Eleanor was fading, soft and ready to be swept away. I was giving them enough rope to hang themselves. And right on schedule, they decided it was time to kick the chair out from under me. It happened on a cold, unforgiving Tuesday in early December. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening snow. I was in the living room, knitting a scarf I had no intention of finishing, when I heard the front door open. They didn't knock anymore. They just used the spare key Chloe had safely stored for me. They didn't come alone. Marcus walked in first, his face pale, his eyes fixed firmly on the hardwood floor. Chloe followed, practically buzzing with an electric, nervous energy. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, the kind of outfit you wear when you mean business. Behind them stepped a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, wearing a sleek camel coat, holding a leather portfolio. She had the overly bright, predatory smile of a real estate agent smelling a fat commission. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice tight. He finally looked up, and the guilt in his eyes was so raw it almost made me pity him. Almost. "Marcus, Chloe?" I set my knitting down, acting appropriately startled. "What is this? Who is your friend?" Chloe took charge, stepping forward and taking a seat on the edge of the coffee table, positioning herself physically lower than me to project a false sense of submission and care. Eleanor, take a deep breath. We need to have a very important family meeting. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, glossy folder. She placed it gently on my lap. The logo on the front read The Grand Cedars, Premier Assisted Living. We've been talking, Chloe began, her voice taking on that soft, syrupy tone usually reserved for soothing a panicked toddler. And we've been observing. It's getting too hard for you here, Eleanor. The stairs are dangerous. The maintenance is a nightmare. And, well, your memory, sweetie, it's slipping. We're terrified you're going to leave the stove on or wander out into the snow. I looked down at the brochure. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. The moment had arrived. The climax of their deception. I don't understand, I said, pitching my voice to tremble just a fraction. I love my home. Thomas built the gazebo in the back with his own hands. We know, Mom, Marcus choked out. He sat heavily on the sofa opposite me, burying his face in his hands for a brief second before looking at me. But we can't maintain it, and you can't live here safely. We found a place. The Grand Cedars. It's beautiful. They have a gardening club, Mom. You'll make friends. But how can we afford that? I asked, playing my part to perfection. Those places are incredibly expensive. Chloe's smile tightened. Here came the knife. You don't need to worry about the finances, Eleanor, Chloe said smoothly. She gestured to the woman in the camel coat who had been standing awkwardly near the doorway. This is Brenda. She's a top-tier broker in the area. We've already had the house appraised. I looked at Brenda. Appraised? Yes, Mrs. Vance. Brenda stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood. You have a beautiful property. Given the current market, we can list it and have it closed within 30 days. It will more than cover your transition into the Grand Cedars. Sell my house? I let a tear pool in my eye, letting it spill over and trace a hot line down my wrinkled cheek. It was a real tear, but it wasn't for the house. It was for my son. Marcus, you want to sell the house? Marcus flinched as if I had struck him. It's for the best, Mom. It's the only way. It's the only way to pay off your loan sharks, I thought. It's the only way to keep yourself out of federal prison. But my signature, I murmured, acting bewildered. I haven't signed anything with a realtor. I haven't agreed to this. Chloe leaned in, placing her warm, manicured hand over my cold, trembling one. Eleanor, do you remember a few years ago, when you had your heart surgery? You signed a durable power of attorney. You gave Marcus the legal right to handle your affairs if you became incapacitated. She said the word delicately, but it hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Incapacitated. You see, Chloe continued, her voice gaining a sharp, authoritative edge. We've already consulted with your primary care doctor. We explained the memory lapses, the confusion. Based on that and Marcus's legal authority, we've already signed the listing agreement with Brenda. The house goes on the market tomorrow. We've also already paid the deposit for your suite at the Grand Cedars. You move in 2 weeks. There it was, the absolute unvarnished audacity. They had completely bypassed me, using my own emergency document to orchestrate a hostile takeover of my life. They expected me to scream. They expected me to fight, to throw things, to threaten them with lawyers. They were braced for an ugly, hysterical confrontation from a confused old woman refusing to accept reality. Instead, I gave them silence. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were bright, greedy, waiting for my breakdown. I looked at Marcus. He was sweating, his leg bouncing nervously, a coward waiting for his mother's wrath. I looked at the broker, who suddenly seemed very interested in the crown molding. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Finally, I picked up the glossy brochure for the Grand Cedars. I smoothed my hand over the cover, staring at the picture of smiling, silver-haired actors pretending to play golf. 2 weeks? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, entirely stripped of emotion. Chloe blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my calm. Yes, 2 weeks. It's a rapid transition, but it's best to rip the Band-Aid off. I nodded slowly, deliberately. I looked at my son. Is this really what you want, Marcus? Is this truly what you believe is best for me? Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yes, Mom, it is. I promise you, you'll be happy there. I'll visit all the time. A lie. A pathetic, transparent lie. Once the house was sold and the money was funneled into his offshore accounts to pay his debts, I would be lucky if I ever saw him again. He would leave me to rot in a sterile room smelling of bleach and boiled vegetables. "All right," I said, the single word dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond. "All right?" Chloe echoed, her voice pitching up in disbelief. You agree?" "You have the power of attorney," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the brochure. "You have the real estate agent. You have the facility booked. It seems you have left me with no choices. If I fight you, you will just humiliate me in a courtroom to prove I am unfit. I am old, Chloe, but I am not stupid. I know when I am beaten." I slowly stood up from the armchair. My joints popped slightly. I didn't look at them as I gathered my knitting. "I will start packing my personal things tomorrow," I said, my voice dead, defeated. "I assume you will handle the sale of the furniture?" "Yes, absolutely." Chloe practically beamed, the relief washing over her face in a sickening wave. She had won. The old bat had surrendered without a single drop of blood being spilled. "We'll handle everything, Eleanor. You just focus on relaxing." I walked toward the staircase. As I placed my hand on the banister, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. Marcus was watching me, his face a complex map of relief and agonizing guilt. "Marcus," I said softly, "I hope whatever it is you are buying with the price of this house, it brings you peace, because it is going to cost you a very heavy price." I didn't wait for his answer. I climbed the stairs, my back straight, my steps measured. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door quietly behind me. As soon as the latch clicked, the facade dropped. I stood in the center of the room, my heart pounding a fierce, victorious rhythm against my ribs. I walked over to the window and looked down at the driveway. Downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of their voices. Chloe was probably celebrating, uncorking the imaginary champagne. Marcus was probably convincing himself that he had just done a noble, difficult thing. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had trapped me in a legal corner from which there was no escape. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Arthur's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Arthur," I said, my voice no longer trembling, no longer the whisper of a defeated widow. It was the voice of a woman who had just locked the gates of the slaughterhouse. "Eleanor," Arthur replied. "Did they do it?" "They brought the broker. The house goes on the market tomorrow. They are using the power of attorney." I heard the scratch of a pen on paper through the receiver. "Excellent. The bait is taken. They are officially legally and financially committed to the sale. Are you ready for phase 2? I looked around my bedroom, at the antique vanity, the 4-poster bed, the memories of a lifetime that I was about to weaponize. "Execute the plan, Arthur," I said coldly. "Burn it all down." To understand the absolute, devastating beauty of the trap Arthur and I built, you must first understand the mechanics of stealing. When a thief breaks into your home, they don't steal the walls or the floorboards. They steal the value inside. The jewelry, the cash, the electronics. Marcus and Chloe thought they were stealing my house, but they were looking at the walls, completely unaware that I had already emptied the vault. That 3-hour meeting in Arthur's office, weeks before my supposed surrender in the living room, was a masterclass in defensive financial warfare. Once I showed Arthur the depths of Marcus's debt and the existence of the unrevoked power of attorney, we realized that simply fighting them would be a miserable, drawn-out bloodbath. They would drag my mental state through the mud. They would freeze my assets. "So we don't fight the sale," Arthur had said, pacing behind his heavy mahogany desk, the gears of his brilliant legal mind turning. "We let them sell it, but we make sure there is absolutely nothing left for them to take. Eleanor, how much equity do you have in the property?" "All of it," I replied. "Thomas and I paid off the mortgage 12 years ago." "Over $1 million in pure equity," Arthur muttered, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "We are going to do a reverse mortgage. A home equity conversion mortgage, to be exact. It is perfectly legal, perfectly tailored for seniors in your exact demographic, and it is the financial equivalent of pulling the pin on a grenade and handing it to your son. For the uninitiated, a reverse mortgage allows a homeowner over the age of 62 to borrow against the equity of their home. You get the cash, and the loan balance grows over time. The loan doesn't have to be repaid until the homeowner dies, moves out, or, crucially, sells the house. Working with a private expedited lender Arthur trusted, I took out a massive lump sum reverse mortgage on the estate. I stripped the house of nearly $800,000 in equity. I signed stacks of paperwork, underwent the mandatory counseling sessions over the phone while Chloe was out getting her nails done, and locked the deal in place. But I didn't stop there. If I just moved that $800,000 into my regular checking account, Marcus could access it the second he activated his power of attorney. That was where the second layer of the trap came in, the irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is exactly what it sounds like. Once you put assets into it, you cannot take them back out, and you no longer legally own them. The trust owns them. Therefore, a power of attorney governing my personal assets is entirely useless against it. I transferred the $800,000 from the reverse mortgage directly into the trust. Then Arthur and I quietly subdivided the property. The 4 acres of pristine apple orchards behind the house transferred into the trust. Thomas's original oil paintings, my antique jewelry collection, the solid silver flatware I inherited from my grandmother, all legally appraised, documented, and moved into the ownership of the trust. By the time Chloe and Marcus sat in my living room, handing me that glossy brochure for the assisted living facility, they thought they had cornered a wealthy, vulnerable widow. In reality, they were holding a power of attorney over a woman whose only remaining asset was a house mortgaged to the hilt. The 2 weeks following my surrender were a surreal, out-of-body experience. I watched my daughter-in-law transform into a manic, greed-fueled general. Chloe took complete control of my life. Her fake sweetness dialed up to an absolute fever pitch now that she thought she had won. "Don't you lift a finger, Eleanor," she would sing out, bustling through the kitchen with a clipboard. "You just sit by the fire and read. The movers will handle the heavy lifting. I've hired a professional staging company to come in on Thursday to make the place look fresh for the open house." I sat in my armchair, sipping tea, and watched strangers walk through the home I had built. I watched them roll up my Persian rugs. I watched them take down the family portraits from the mantel, replacing them with generic, sterile mirrors that reflected nothing but empty space. Marcus, to his credit, couldn't look me in the eye. He spent those 2 weeks avoiding the house as much as possible, claiming he had urgent logistical issues at work. He was a coward, hiding in his office while his wife did the dirty work of dismantling his mother's life. When he was around, he walked with a slight hunch, carrying the physical weight of his betrayal. The real estate market in upstate New York was red hot, and Brenda, the shark-like broker Chloe had hired, knew her business. Within 4 days of the listing going live, they had multiple offers. I was sitting at the breakfast nook pretending to work on a crossword puzzle when Chloe burst through the back door, her face flushed with victory. "We got it!" she shrieked, waving a thick stack of paper. Marcus trailed in behind her, looking nauseous. "An all-cash offer from a developer in the city. Over asking price. They want a rapid close. 2 weeks. "That's wonderful, dear," I murmured, not looking up from my puzzle. "A 5-letter word for deception." "Fraud," Marcus muttered under his breath, walking straight to the liquor cabinet and pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch. At 11 a.m. "Don't be dramatic, Marcus," Chloe snapped, her eyes flashing. "This is a clean break. The developer is waiving almost all contingencies, except for a standard structural inspection. Once that's clear, we sign the papers, the funds go into escrow, and everything is settled." She leaned over the table, her perfume thick and cloying. "You see, Eleanor, everything is working out perfectly. Your new suite at the Grand Cedars is ready on Monday. You'll be so comfortable there." But greed makes people careless, and arrogance makes them blind. 2 days later, the structural inspection report came back. It was the only hiccup in their flawless plan, and it was the catalyst that would ruin them completely. I was in my bedroom packing a small suitcase when I heard Chloe screaming on the phone downstairs in the home office. I walked quietly to the top of the stairs and listened. "What do you mean, severe foundation settling?" Chloe yelled, her voice shrill with panic. "It's a historic home. Of course it has some cracks. $80,000? Are you out of your mind? The developer is threatening to walk away?" A pause. I could hear Marcus pacing heavily in the background. No, we can't let them walk," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a desperate, frantic register. "If we have to list it again, we lose another month. We don't have a month. Just tell them we'll cover the repair. We'll hire a contractor immediately to stabilize the foundation before closing." Another pause. "We don't have $80,000 in cash right now, Brenda," Chloe hissed. "All of Eleanor's liquidity is tied up in Well, it's complicated. Just find us a contractor who will do the work now and take payment directly from the escrow proceeds on closing day. We will sign a promissory note. We will guarantee it. I leaned my head against the cool plaster of the hallway wall and closed my eyes. It was too perfect. It was almost biblical. Because Marcus's credit was utterly destroyed by his IRS liens and predatory loans, he couldn't sign a financial guarantee for a stick of gum, let alone an $80,000 construction loan. The contractor Brenda found, a fast-acting, high-interest commercial firm, required a rock-solid guarantor to start the emergency foundation work before closing. Marcus's power of attorney allowed him to sign on my behalf, but my liquid cash was magically gone, hidden safely in the trust. So, blinded by the promise of $1 million payout at closing, absolutely desperate to keep the buyer from walking away, Chloe did the most foolish thing a greedy person can do. She stepped out of the shadows. She personally co-signed the promissory note for the foundation repairs. She legally bound herself to an $80,000 debt, utterly convinced it would just be deducted from the massive pile of cash they were about to inherit from my house. "It's fine, Marcus," I heard her snap at him later that evening in the kitchen. "It's just bridge financing. We close in 10 days. The house sells for $2 million. The contractor takes his $80,000 from the escrow, and we walk away with the rest. Stop hyperventilating. I am fixing this." She was fixing it, all right. She was cementing her own feet to the floor of a sinking ship. Monday arrived with a bitter, biting chill in the air. The day of my exile. I had packed exactly 2 suitcases. I left everything else. The expensive coats, the fine china, the books I had collected over a lifetime. I left them because I knew they were already legally protected by the trust. But to Chloe, it looked like the ultimate surrender. It looked like an old woman who was too tired to care anymore. Chloe drove me to the Grand Cedars in her pristine SUV. Marcus didn't come. He claimed he couldn't get the time off work. The truth was, he couldn't look his mother in the eye as she was dropped off at a facility. The drive was silent. Chloe had classical music playing softly on the radio, tapping her French manicured nails on the steering wheel, radiating a smug, serene satisfaction. When we pulled up to the sweeping, heavily landscaped entrance of the Grand Cedars, attendants in crisp uniforms rushed out to grab my bags. It was a beautiful prison. The lobby smelled of lavender and industrial floor cleaner. "Well, here we are," Chloe chirped, walking me to the reception desk. She had already paid the first month's exorbitant fee using my checking account, a small price to pay to get me out of the way, she figured. She hugged me, a stiff, performative embrace meant for the benefit of the receptionist. "You are going to love it here, Eleanor," she whispered in my ear, her voice cold and triumphant. "It's time to rest." "Thank you, Chloe," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "for everything you've done." She smiled, oblivious to the threat. She turned on her heel and walked out through the sliding glass doors, back to her SUV, back to my house, completely certain she had conquered me. I checked into my room. It was beige, sterile, and perfectly fine. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, pulled out my phone, and texted Arthur. "I'm in. See you on Friday." I didn't intend to stay at the Grand Cedars for more than 4 days. Arthur had already secured the lease on a stunning penthouse apartment in the city, paid for in cash from the trust. The view from that penthouse was spectacular, but I needed to stay put until the trap snapped shut. For the next 4 days, I played bingo in the rec room. I ate the bland, low-sodium chicken dinners. I smiled at the nurses and made polite conversation with the other residents, many of whom truly were lost to the fog of dementia. Being around them broke my heart, and it hardened my resolve. This was where my son wanted to abandon me. This was the dark, forgotten corner of society he thought I belonged in, just so he could clear his debts. Friday morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. Closing day. The day Marcus and Chloe would sit in a plush conference room in the city, pen in hand, ready to sell the legacy my husband and I had built, ready to collect their blood money. I put on my best wool blazer, applied a touch of red lipstick, and called a private car service to take me to the city. I wasn't going to hide in the facility. I wasn't going to let Arthur deliver the final blow alone. I was going to look my son in the eye when the world he tried to steal burned to ash around him. The offices of Sterling and Vance Title Company were located on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass high-rise in the financial district. The conference room boasted panoramic views of the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the harsh, unforgiving winter light, and a massive mahogany table that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. It was the perfect stage for an execution. I arrived precisely 10 minutes after the scheduled closing time. I didn't announce myself to the receptionist. I just walked past her desk, the heels of my leather boots clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in months, my mind was entirely quiet. I pushed open the heavy glass door to the conference room. The scene inside was a portrait of eager, simmering greed. Marcus was sitting at the center of the table, a Mont Blanc pen resting loosely in his fingers. He was wearing his best charcoal suit, his hair perfectly slicked back, the nervous sweat from the past few weeks replaced by the flushed, arrogant glow of a man who thinks he has just outrun his own ruin. Chloe was sitting right next to him, practically vibrating with excitement. She had a calculator app open on her phone, likely dividing the anticipated $1 million windfall into new cars, vacations, and whatever else she thought she was owed. Brenda, the real estate agent, sat across from them, organizing a stack of color-coded files. And at the head of the table sat the escrow officer, a stern-looking woman in a gray blazer. Arthur was leaning against the back wall, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of legal neutrality. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me. 5 heads snapped up. The reaction was instantaneous and beautifully varied. Brenda looked confused. The escrow officer looked annoyed by the interruption. But Marcus and Chloe? All the blood drained from their faces in absolute unison, leaving them the color of dirty snow. "Mom?" Marcus choked out, dropping his expensive pen. It clattered loudly against the mahogany. What are you doing here?" Chloe recovered faster, her survival instincts kicking in. She shot up from her leather chair, her heels scraping against the carpet. She plastered on that familiar, sickeningly sweet smile, though her eyes were wild with panic. "Eleanor! Oh my goodness, sweetheart," she cooed, rushing toward me with her arms outstretched. "You shouldn't be traveling. Does the staff at the Grand Cedars know you left? You're supposed to be resting." I didn't move. I just looked at her, a cold, flat, dead-eyed stare that stopped her dead in her tracks, 2 feet away from me. "I am resting, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I'm just here to watch the ink dry." I walked past her, ignoring the stunned silence, and took an empty leather chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite my son. I placed my handbag on the floor, folded my hands in front of me, and nodded to the escrow officer. "Please," I said politely. "Don't let me interrupt. Continue." Marcus swallowed so hard I could hear it. He looked wildly at Arthur, then at Brenda. I have the power of attorney," he stammered, his voice defensive, cracking slightly. "I have the legal right to sign these documents. Her presence isn't required." "That is correct, Mr. Vance," the escrow officer said smoothly, tapping a thick stack of paper against the table to straighten it. "Your power of attorney has been verified by our legal team. You are authorized to execute the sale. We were just about to review the final settlement statement before signing the deed transfer." "Great," Chloe said, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. She hurried back to her seat, practically throwing herself into the chair. She glared at me, a silent warning to stay quiet. "Let's just get this done. The developer's funds are already in escrow, right?" "Yes," the escrow officer confirmed. "The buyer has wired the full purchase price of $1,200,000. They have waived a final walkthrough. The funds are secure." Chloe let out a breath she had been holding for a month. A triumphant, greedy sigh. She looked at Marcus and squeezed his arm. They had made it. They had crossed the finish line. "Now," the escrow officer continued, sliding a single, densely typed sheet of paper across the table toward Marcus. "This is the ALTA settlement statement. It breaks down the purchase price, the closing costs, broker commissions, and the payoff of all outstanding liens on the property. Please review the bottom line, cash to seller, and sign at the bottom." Marcus picked up the paper. Chloe immediately leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting straight to the bottom right corner of the page. She was looking for her $1 million salvation. I watched their faces. I watched the exact second the illusion shattered. Chloe's brow furrowed. She squinted, leaning closer to the paper as if the ink were written in a foreign language. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Marcus just stared. His breathing stopped. His hands began to tremble so violently that the paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. "Wait," Chloe whispered. Her voice sounded broken. She tapped a manicured nail against the paper. This is a typo. There's a mistake. I assure you, ma'am, our accounting is precise, the escrow officer replied, her tone turning frosty. No, look at this. Chloe's voice escalated into a shrill shriek. She snatched the paper from Marcus's hands and pointed a trembling finger at the escrow officer. The cash to seller line. It says 0. It says we owe $400 in recording fees. Where is the $1 million? Arthur stepped forward from the back wall, buttoning his suit jacket. His presence suddenly commanded the entire room. If you direct your attention to line 204 of the settlement statement, Chloe, Arthur said, his voice calm and methodical, you will see the payoff demand from Apex Financial. Chloe's eyes frantically scanned the page. Apex Financial? What is that? Eleanor doesn't have a mortgage. She paid the house off 12 years ago. She did, Arthur agreed gently, until 3 weeks ago, when my client, operating in her full legal and mental capacity, executed a home equity conversion mortgage, a reverse mortgage. She extracted $1,150,000 in equity from the property. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air right out of Marcus's lungs. She what? Marcus whispered, his voice hollow, staring at me as if I were a ghost. After the reverse mortgage payoff, plus the accrued interest, the standard transfer taxes, and Brenda's broker commission, Arthur continued, gesturing to the pale, stunned real estate agent. The equity in the property is entirely wiped out. The sale price of $1.2 million exactly covers the debt. There are no proceeds from this sale. You are selling a completely empty box, Marcus. No, Marcus shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned white. No, she can't do that. I have the power of attorney. I control her finances. A power of attorney does not revoke a homeowner's right to manage their own property while they are still of sound mind, Marcus, Arthur said, his tone shifting from neutral to something dangerously sharp. She didn't need your permission, and since you never bothered to actually talk to your mother, but rather spent your time plotting behind her back, you missed the transaction. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. She dropped the paper on the table, her chest heaving. The realization was hitting her in waves. The millions they thought they were stealing to pay off Marcus's IRS debt and loan sharks. It didn't exist. Marcus was going to default. He was going to lose his business, his freedom, everything. But the trap hadn't fully closed yet. There was one more jaw left to snap. There is one other pressing matter, Arthur said, reaching into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, white invoice and placed it gently on the table in front of Chloe. What is that? Chloe snapped, backing away from the paper as if it were coated in poison. That is the final invoice from the structural engineering firm you hired to fix the foundation, Arthur said. $82,000, due upon completion. The work was finalized yesterday to appease the buyer. Chloe let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. Well, you just said there's no money, so the escrow company can't pay them. They'll just have to put a lien on the house, and the buyer will have to deal with it. Actually, the escrow officer interjected, looking over her glasses at Chloe. The buyer's contract mandates a title free and clear of all encumbrances. If a mechanic's lien is placed on the property, the buyer will walk away. And since you breached the contract by failing to deliver a clear title, they will sue you for damages. But more importantly, Chloe, Arthur said, tapping the invoice, look at the signature line on the promissory note you signed with the contractor. Chloe's eyes darted to the copy of the contract stapled to the back of the invoice. When you rushed to secure the contractor to save this deal, Arthur explained, his voice ruthlessly calm, you realized Eleanor's checking accounts were practically empty. You couldn't use the power of attorney to guarantee the loan because she had no liquid assets to leverage. Because I moved them all into an irrevocable trust, I spoke up, my voice cutting through the room. It was the first time I had spoken since sitting down. Every penny of the reverse mortgage, every piece of art, the antique jewelry you loved staring at so much, Chloe, it's all locked away in a trust. Untouchable by you, untouchable by Marcus's creditors, untouchable by anyone. So, Arthur finished, delivering the final fatal blow. To get the contractor to start the work, you signed a personal guarantee, Chloe. You bound yourself. Because there are no proceeds from this sale to cover the invoice, that $82,000 debt belongs entirely to you. And knowing the commercial firm you hired, if you don't cut them a personal check by the end of business today, they will place a levy on your personal bank accounts in your own home by Monday morning. Chloe stopped breathing. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened in absolute unadulterated terror. She owed $80,000. Personally, immediately, and her husband was about to default on $400,000 of federal tax debt and street loans. They were financially annihilated. Marcus slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The man who had been hiding from his own mother for weeks suddenly found his voice. You signed a personal guarantee?" he hissed, his face contorting with rage. "Without telling me? I was trying to save your pathetic life," Chloe screamed back at him, the polished, sweet facade shattering into a million jagged pieces. "If we didn't fix the foundation, the buyer would walk. We needed the $1 million to keep you out of prison, you idiot. And now we owe another $80,000 because of your stupidity," Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the table. "My stupidity?" Chloe stood up, leaning over the table, her face inches from his. "You're the one who ran your company into the ground. You're the one who had to steal from your own mother to survive." They were tearing each other apart, right there in the boardroom, like wild animals trapped in a cage of their own making. The escrow officer looked appalled. Brenda was shrinking back into her chair, realizing she wasn't getting a dime in commission since the closing costs were eating whatever was left. I watched them for a long moment. I watched the marriage dissolve into toxic, hateful venom. I watched the boy I raised reveal the weak, desperate core he had become. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a rush of victorious adrenaline. I just felt an overwhelming, profound sense of finality. The tumor had been excised. I stood up. I picked up my handbag and slung the strap over my shoulder. The movement caught Marcus's eye. He stopped screaming at his wife and looked at me. His chest was heaving. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice breaking, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Mom, please. You have the money. It's in the trust. Please, they're going to put me in jail. They're going to take my house. Please, you have to help me." I walked toward the door, my steps slow and deliberate. I stopped when I reached his chair. I looked down at him, at the sweat on his forehead, and the pathetic, begging look in his eyes. "The woman you are looking for," I said softly, my voice devoid of any warmth, any anger, any motherly affection. "The woman who would have sold her soul to save you. She died the day you tried to lock her in a nursing home to steal her life." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't look at Chloe, who was sobbing hysterically into her hands. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. Arthur followed me out a moment later. He didn't say a word. He just offered me his arm. I took it, and we walked to the elevator together, leaving the sounds of my son's screaming matches echoing faintly behind the closed boardroom door. That was 4 months ago. The rain is still falling outside the windows of my penthouse. The Earl Grey tea has gone slightly cold, but it still tastes perfect. I know, through Arthur, how the story ended for them. The closing went through, because Chloe had to liquidate her own retirement account and beg her parents for loans just to pay the contractor and clear the title. The house was sold, the reverse mortgage was paid off, and Marcus walked away with exactly $0. 2 weeks later, the IRS seized Marcus's assets. Last I heard, Chloe filed for divorce to protect whatever scrap of credit she had left, and Marcus was living in a cheap motel outside the city, awaiting trial for financial fraud related to his logistics company. My phone on the marble counter lights up again. Another call. Another desperate attempt to reach the mother he thought he could discard. I look at the screen. The block feature on these new smartphones really is a marvel of modern technology. I press a single button, and the call is diverted to a digital void, never to be heard from again. I turn my chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping my cashmere shawl a little tighter around my shoulders. The city lights are coming on, a sea of diamonds scattered across the dark. I am 65 years old. My house is gone. My son is gone. And for the first time in my entire life, I am completely, utterly free.